I was working as a waitress at a bar in the city, and this guy got overserved and was being pretty rowdy. He had grabbed my arm and tried pulling me over to him, so we cut him off and sent him on his way. As I was locking up the patio, maybe an hour later, he wanders up to the edge from the parking lot, seemingly sobered up a bit. I was smoking as I worked and he called over to me and asked to bum a cigarette. I was like, sure, not a huge dick. I walked over and went to hand him one, and he jumped on the edge of the porch and grabbed my wrist and pulled me up to him. He looked into my eyes with this wild, weird look and says, "I will fucking find you, and it will be soon." I flipped out and leveraged my foot against the railing to get out of his grasp and booked it inside. I sat at a nearby Waffle House until morning, paranoid he was going to try and follow me home or something. Probably just a drunk asshole trying to get his rocks off when scaring a teenage girl, but goddamn it worked. Back in high school, I was on antidepressants. I was receiving help from my family doctor rather than a psychiatrist. There's generally a 1 to 2 week transition period where you have some undesirable side effects, usually nothing too major though. I was home alone taking a bath, trying to relax. I distinctly remember hearing a dark, eerie, ominous voice say,
"Someone is here. Better check your closet."
Tried to forget about it, but I was close to having an anxiety attack at that point and got out. Wrapped myself in a towel and warily checked the linen closet right outside the bathroom. The voice comes back and says,
"Wrong closet."
So I go check my bedroom closet, heart pounding and sweating at this point. After feeling a huge wave of relief that nothing was actually there, I hear the creepy voice emit this evil demonic-like laugh fading off in the distance. Once I started seeing an actual psychiatrist, they took me off that med real quick, because apparently it can cause hallucinations. Many years ago, I lived in a big, old 3-story house that had a room on the middle level that we converted into an office. I used to write financial reports late at night that were published early the next morning. The office had a few computers, and my toddler's son had been playing on one of them for the most of the evening, right up until I finished work at around 9 p.m. By then he had fallen asleep, so I switched off his monitor, scooped him back up and took him to the bed, flicking off the light as I left. For the next couple of hours, I relaxed in another room watching TV with my wife. She went to bed around 11 p.m., and at midnight I decided to do the same. I realized I'd left a window open in the office, so I went in there to close it. The house was silent and the room was pitch black dark and ice cold when I walked in. Colder than it should have been for the time of the year, even with the window open. I paused for a moment in the center of the room to think about this, and then it happened. Something was tapping on the glass, but it wasn't the random tappings of a bird or another kind of animal. It was completely uniform. It sounded human, but I was on the second floor, so how was that possible? It was so dark that I couldn't make anything out against the black glass, but a few moments later it happened again. By now I was already feeling on edge. Then something happened that chilled me to the core, because out of the corner of the room to my right and from the darkness, a high-pitched, almost squeaky voice began to speak quite loudly.
"I can see you."
I froze on the spot. My blood went cold. My bowels prepared for evacuation. My God, I thought, I never wrote that book. Any book. It spoke again, but with greater emphasis on that all-important word.
"I can see you."
I determined that I was almost certainly fucked, so I figured, what the hell. I turned slowly to my right and walked into the darkness until I finally reached my son's computer. Nothing there but an empty chair, but no talking now, just silence. A horrible silence. Carefully, I reached over and switched on the monitor. The screen brightened, and there it was, something red and horrible. Once again, it tapped on the glass. It was fucking Elmo from my kid's Sesame Street game. When I was in high school, I had a huge crush on a guy a couple years older than me. He was on the boys' basketball team, and I was on the girls' team. I would always try to get him to play basketball with me at our town's outdoor basketball court. He usually declined. One night in the middle of the winter, he asked me if I wanted to come play one-on-one with him. I thought it was weird. He wanted to play basketball in the middle of the night in winter, so I had my friend come with. She got bored quickly and he was being really flirty with me, so I agreed she could leave. He assured her he would drive me back to her house. I was spending the night there. About 30 minutes later, I'm freezing and ask him to drive me back. We get in his car and he tells me he has to warm up the car before we can go. He's on his phone for about 10 minutes and we are sitting there in silence. Out of nowhere, he starts telling me about his sexual fetishes and how he gets off on physically causing other people pain. He said that no one really knows the real him, and if they did, it would scare the living shit out of most people. I'm starting to get uncomfortable at this point and ask if we can leave. Pulls out of the parking lot and starts driving the opposite direction of my friend's house. We live in a small town and he drives about 5 miles out of town and turns on a gravel road. He tells me he's going to take me to meet some people he thinks would really like me. He then tells me I seem like the type of girl who would like being submissive to a bunch of men, and he wouldn't even have to make me beg for it. So I'm getting really freaked out and scared at this point. I'm looking for my cell phone and I remembered I had left it at my friend's house to charge. I start asking him questions to distract him. I'm finally able to get my hands on his phone when he stops at the shack in the middle of nowhere. He isn't aware that I have his phone at this point and tells me to get out of the car because his friends are waiting inside and we don't want to make them mad. I dial 911 and tell him if he doesn't take me back to my friends, I'm calling the police right then. He looks really shocked and then starts laughing hysterically. He tried to convince me that this was all a big joke and he wanted to see how I would react. I held his phone with 911 ready to go the entire ride back to my friends. Once he pulled in the driveway, I got out of the car and he rolled down his window and said, "I would really appreciate it if you never tell anybody about this," and peeled out. I was 15 years old and should have called the cops, but I was young and dumb. The year is 2002. It's late at night and I'm driving to my parents' house that's some way outside the city, basically in the middle of nowhere. A truck cuts me off at an intersection on my way to the highway. I had right of way and would have plowed straight into the truck if I hadn't slammed on the brakes. I honk the horn at him and give him the middle finger, which I doubt he sees, and pass him as we get on the highway. A little while later, I turn off the highway and notice the same truck turns the same way. The roads are smaller and it's dark, so I'm driving at the speed limit and the truck catches up to me. He's getting uncomfortably close, and even though I start speeding up, he just gets closer and closer. When the truck is like 3 feet from my rear bumper, I accelerate as fast as I can and get a couple 100 yards between us so I can quickly turn at the next intersection. He follows. I hit the accelerator and turn again when the next intersection comes along. So I'm racing down these country roads that are barely wide enough for the truck, and this asshole is keeping up. My heart is beating like crazy, but I also know the area and the roads. And as we get into the roads that run through the woods, I turn off my headlights, drive like a maniac, and manage to turn to even a smaller road without him possibly seeing me take the turn. I can't keep driving because I know the road just goes to a cabin and ends there. So I come to a stop a bit down the road and to the side so the trees will cover me, and turn off my engine. And then I wait. After a while I can see his headlights on the road I turned off from. He's driving slower now. He stops at the intersection and shines a flashlight down the road where I am. He's looking at my direction for what feels like minutes, and I hope the flashlight can't reach all the way to where the car is. Finally, he drives away. I wait for 5 more minutes and then head back to the main road and continue to my parents' house. I was working at a convenience store, 19 years old, single mom. Luckily this day I wasn't alone. This guy came in, walked around, and then went back to pump his gas, then drove off without paying. I got the tag number, called the police per policy, and didn't expect anything to come from it because that's what always happened. Gas theft just wasn't a priority to the police department. To my surprise, less than an hour later, an officer walks in and asks me to identify the guy, which I did. Really didn't think too much of it, just happy they caught the asshole. I went on about my business, went home, got on with life. The next day the manager calls me early, tells me that she saw the guy who I identified on the news. He was wanted for 2 counts of murder. He had murdered a female jogger, no apparent motive, and a convenience store clerk that he had kidnapped after robbing her. I assumed she was mistaken because that just seemed too crazy. Something I did helping catch a murderer just seemed unlikely. Later that day, the officer came by and told me it was true and thanked me. Without the tag number, they may have not caught him until he had hurt many women. She also told me that the reason that the police caught him quickly was that the car was stolen. Then the officer told me that the scariest part of all, coming in and walking around the store is exactly the same thing he did before the robbery and kidnapping of the second woman he murdered. I will never know exactly why he didn't rob me or worse. I assume it was because my manager was there, which was unusual. I'm just grateful for whatever it was. We had a nice old neighbor, male, probably in his 70s or early 80s. It lived across from the street from us and had a big beautiful black lab. His name was Lee and her name was Booger. She was the nicest dog ever. Well, we used to see Lee out on his porch all the time or in his yard. We would always say hi, and sometimes my dad would go and have some beers with him later in the evening. Really nice guy. Anyway, came this hot summer, and I mean hot. 110 degrees for at least a month in Michigan. That's ridiculous. We didn't see Lee out on his porch or the yard for a couple of days, but we figured he was probably staying inside with the AC because he was an older fella. We went to visit my aunt for 3 days after that because she was awesome and had a pool. When we came back, my dad went to visit Lee, and I just remember everyone being really upset. Not just an old man died upset. My dad was puking in the grass when he came back. Even an hour later, he wouldn't talk about it, even to my mom. I know he gave a statement to the police, and I remember seeing them taking Lee's dog away. I was crying because Booger was a nice dog and I wanted to keep her if Lee had died. Didn't understand what had happened at the time. It wasn't until older that my dad finally opened up to me about it. He was drunk when he did. He needed to get it off his chest. He had never even told my mother. They were divorced by the time he told me. He said that he went to the house and the smell was horrible. Thick, almost oily, like you could feel it coating your mouth. He said that the first thing he noticed was the lights all being off and the flies. There were flies all over. Lee wasn't anywhere to be seen right off, so my dad looked around the house. He said that he got halfway into the hall and he heard a weird noise in the back bedroom, a repetitive noise. He said that he first thought it was a clicking noise, but as he got closer it started to sound more wet. It didn't even occur to him that the dog would still be in the house, the hungry dog. He opened the door to the back bedroom and he said the stink hit him in the face like a ton of bricks. He almost passed out from the strength of the stench. He threw up right there in the doorway before he even looked. Lee was in his bed, or what was left of him. His head and shoulders were intact, but he was decaying rapidly in the heat. From the chest down, Dad said he was missing most of his flesh. His gut was entirely gone. The dog still had her muzzle in him and was working on a hole in his legs. He said that the dog didn't even stop or notice him. He slammed the door and booked it home. So this actually happened pretty recently, and I hope I can properly do this story justice. This happened the weekend before Christmas, so a few details to set up the scene. When you walk down the stairs of my house, you can see the front door at about the last 2 steps. Also, my roommate's dog is a little shit and claws at the blind, so anybody can see through in the bottom of the window. Anyways, me and my buddy are up in my room because I keep my good beer in my mini fridge because I can't trust anybody. On our way down the stairs, we're just having a normal, casual conversation about work or some shit. Then we get to the point where we can see the front door, and there's this creature crouched down, smiling in with their face pressed to the window and staring through our souls with black eyes. I completely freeze and my friend says, "What the fuck is that?" My first thought is that someone we know was knocking on the door, but we didn't hear it being upstairs. After about 1 second of me focusing in, I realized that is absolutely not the case. My friend yells this time, "What the fuck is that?" and he bolts back upstairs, leaving me to face this thing on my own. I see that this creature is a female, and it scared the shit out of me because I expected her to be as scared as us and try to run away. But she was smiling, showing about 2 teeth, and seemed overly pleased to see me, which gave me the total creeps. I didn't know if my door was locked, and I didn't know if she was going to try and come in and do witchcraft on us. I didn't even really know how to move anymore. I just tried to evaluate what my move should be because I was sure back upstairs was not the correct choice. And then she started to speak, but I couldn't understand what the hell she was saying through the glass. Then she pointed in my house, and that's when I realized she was pointing at my Christmas lights. See, I host a huge Christmas party every year and go all out in decorations. And this year we turned a refrigerator into an 8-foot snowman. This is what she was coming to see. Once I realized this, I started laughing quite uncontrollably. Still scared and confused because she kept staring at me. My friend came down and we moved out of her sight. I let the dogs in so they'd bark at her and maybe she'd leave. They did bark at her and we stayed out of view, but she started jigging the door handle, trying to get in. I looked at my buddy like, what in the actual fuck is she thinking? So I run over there and push the dogs back and decided to take the plunge and go outside. It was this 4'6" homeless woman who truly looked like a troll, literally 2 teeth and very dark eyes, but she turned out to be nice. I decided to chit-chat with her for a few and then tell her we were leaving. This strategy was a success. The worst part is that we told a bunch of friends that night, and I've had 3 people crouching down in that scary ass position staring at me when I've come downstairs. I can't trust anybody. Once in high school, I was babysitting a teacher's kids with my ex, and the parents were super late, so we decided to stay in the living room, even though the TV and such was downstairs, so we could leave as soon as they got back. They lived in this huge house overlooking the woods and this little pond area, so they had big windows installed throughout the home. At about 12:30, I started getting annoyed, so I gave the parents a call and they said that they were on their way back. By this point, the huge windows were really starting to freak me out, but whatever. I was with my boyfriend and the parents were on their way. A few minutes later, we heard the doorknob and the garage jiggle. We thought it was the parents letting themselves in at first, but it continued to jiggle for about 20 seconds and then stopped. Started freaking out and walked towards the kitchen where the door was and glanced through the window that overlooked the deck. I'll never forget it. There was a strobe light of some on with the man standing in front of it, so he was silhouetted and he was just standing there. I start panicking basically, and the light just stops blinking suddenly. My heart had pretty much stopped. I assume he just left after that, but I called the parents and they were still 20 minutes out, so it couldn't have been them. When I told them about what happened, they informed me that their war vet neighbor who had apparently wandered the property at night may have viewed me as a threat for some reason. Why they didn't tell me that beforehand or tell him that we were going to be there, I'll never know. But hey, I got paid though. Not enough to even go back to that house again. I live in a small cul-de-sac in the middle of nowhere. the next nearest neighborhood is over 4 miles away. One night a few years ago, we got over 1.5 feet of snow overnight. So far from main roads, and on the weekend I knew our roads will remain unplowed for quite some time. I went to my outback deck door to admire the snow-draped trees and the still heavily falling flurries when I noticed footprints leading to my door and then turning around and leaving. I looked and saw that they came from my neighbor's side and thought that one of their more delinquent kids played a joke as my sledding tube on the railing was popped. I decided I'd wait till later as it was early to call their parents. I went on Facebook, and after scrolling for a bit, I noticed one of my neighbors closer to the entrance posted, "Did someone knock for me or something at my back door?" I immediately called her and told her I have an idea. I called the first house on the entrance and told him what was going on. He went and checked, and sure enough, they were there too. Everyone started calling everyone else. I called the family at the far end and they told me that there was none there. Then I got a call from my next door neighbor. She called the woman that lives next to the end house. She said that there were footprints that led to her door, but none led away. We already called the police by this point, but now we called them back and said that it's an emergency now. They told us the roads are all unplowed and they can't send a plow truck to clear the way as they are a privately owned company. The woman was losing it, so one of the husbands, a huge bear of a man across the street from her, texted her to say he was coming over to invite her over. He came and she left. We put up one guy's live feed motion recording hunting cameras facing all exits. Nothing came out. Around 7 p.m. a plow truck came as well as 3 cop cars. The couple she was staying with and her went to her house and stood in the doorway as the police searched. They found nothing. She begged them to keep looking, so they did. 2 of the cops went into the basement again. This time only one came up. He took her to the side room and we could hear hysterical crying. By now we were all out of there. Me and a few of the other guys started towards the door when several police confronted us. They told us they found someone hiding under a cover opening in the stairwell that she didn't even know existed. A few minutes later, a scruffy man screaming and kicking came out in cuffs and was led away. In his little campout, they found blankets she just cleaned and put away in the room next to hers. She stayed in other people's houses for a long time before going back. Even then, she wouldn't stay alone. She sold the house next summer. He turned out to be a thrill-seeking junkie who was on probation for assault against a family member. The cops told us that they feel like he didn't want to stay at his apartment after a fight with his roommate and drove off in his roommate's car from the county over and got stuck in our unplowed roads. We all were called as witnesses in this case, and he took some electronics from her basement. Couldn't get him on that since he never left with the stuff. It was about 4 months of court. That's why you always make sure you lock your doors.